Is Florida State closing in on its next 2026 commitment?
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football recruiting analyst and writer. Thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Today, we're going to discuss a lot of junior recruiting information, but it starts off with a guy that is very, very important to the Noles, and that is a local player. Somebody not that far away from campus. He's less than 2 hours from the Panhandle. And as I've discussed many times here on Locked On Seminoles, the Noles have to do a better job along the I-10 corridor from Jacksonville all the way to Mobile. But it really starts exclusively right there in the Panhandle, the true Panhandle of Florida. Amari Clemons, running back out of Marianna High School, one of the small towns in North Florida that every now and then has a really good player. Watching his film, it didn't take any time at all to understand why he has so many offers. The Florida schools, Auburn, and several other programs around the country have offered him a scholarship. And to be quite honest with you, it's kind of nice to have a guy like him close by. It reminds me of some of the players like Carter, somebody like that from the 80s and 90s that Florida State had work done. Smaller back that can really move. This kid's 5'10", 175, 180 pounds, something like that as a junior. He'll end up playing roughly around 200 pounds in college. But Amari Clemons is a player that will run over you if you're not ready, too. He's a player that will make you miss if you're not ready. He has all three elements: shake, power, and speed. Don't have to be 230 pounds to make a guy look bad in a one-on-one. And he's also got pretty darn good vision. I've discussed him a little bit before here on Locked On Seminoles. And after visiting, from all the things that I've heard and basically what's been reported in multiple places, Florida State's in a good spot. Do they end up getting him to commit soon? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know for sure. But at the same time, Florida State needs to get players like this locked in as quickly as possible to start building their next recruiting class. Let's be honest, 25 class exceeded expectations after a pretty darn bad season. Getting this recruiting class kicked off quickly shouldn't be that hard with all the new coaches, all the new enthusiasm. Obviously, Florida State's throwing some money around the way they started off the transfer portal season. I think this is a good sign. If you can get a kid that has offers from the Big Three, Auburn, and many other programs to commit early, I don't care if he is close. It's a good sign not only for Florida State locally, but nationally, because he could, if he wanted to, he could pick up the phone and go to a Big Ten school in the Big 12, ACC, SEC, doesn't matter. That's a really good sign. Also on that front, in terms of possible commitments, I do want to mention one player from the class of 25 from Northside High School in Warner Robins, Chasten Brown. He's another kid that would, quite honestly, surprise everyone if he did not commit to the Florida State Seminoles. 6'7", 270, offensive tackle. This is a young man that Florida State is fortunate enough to have a long-term relationship with, albeit through Coach Hand, recruiting him when he was at UCF, along with Gus Malzahn. Now they are obviously with the Florida State Seminoles. That changes the direction of his recruitment. I don't know if there's really a second place for him, but he will be on campus coming up very soon. And to be honest with you, I don't think there's going to be a long delay. Maybe he'll commit on National Signing Day, which there technically is the second National Signing Day in early February. A few junior college kids, a few kids that didn't sign yet, and him being one. But this is important again because Florida State's got a small O-line class again. They need to improve their numbers. That needs to come to fruition. We're a couple of days out from getting a better idea of what's going on. But if I'm not doing a commitment video on Chasten Brown by, let's say, middle of next week, I'd be surprised, at least pre-recording it. I think we'll know something rather quickly. When he announces is not really my concern. When do I find out and when do the fans find out and start hearing the rumors? That's more important. I think by next Wednesday, there should be definitive information on Brown. Maybe it doesn't go great. You never know. And that's why you take the visits. But that's a kid that Florida State should get. For the rest of the show here, we're going to be talking about juniors with a few questions at the end regarding a couple of key guys and some positional needs. Let's start off with a guy that I probably talked about 2 or 3 times last year, in Cam Brooks. Florida State has a history in South Georgia that is very unique, but no program more so than Thomas County Central. Why? The first Heisman winner for the Noles, Charlie Ward. When I went to a game this past fall, Charlie was there doing a ceremony at the game, kind of random that I was there at that game. Really nice guy. But Cam Brooks was the player that I was there to see. 245 pounds or so last season. I haven't talked to Cam in a while, but he's a defensive lineman that could play the 3-4, the 4-3, either one of them from a traditional standpoint. So it doesn't matter if you run 3-man or 4-man line. He's an edge guy, but he has the strength and length, not one or the other, both. If you want to move him inside on 3rd and 8, like in a 4-3 alignment, that's fine. He could cause some problems and do that. And he still has the frame to get bigger. I don't know how big he's going to get, and I don't know if he's going to end up being a 3-tech in part, full-time or whatever, but I do know Cam Brooks is a very natural pass rusher, and I do not care what position you play if you can rush the passer. As far as schools go, Auburn, Georgia, Florida State, Georgia Tech, everybody that you could imagine has offered him and or been by the school. Coach White has been by recently to see him at Thomas County Central in Thomasville, which is roughly 30 minutes from Tallahassee, which I'm sure most of you know. They need to get that kid. He's the local guy. Jalen Wiggins got away this past year. He was from Tallahassee. That's even worse. And he went to Florida, for crying out loud. This is the local kid in the class of 26 FSU cannot miss. I don't care if he's in the state of Georgia. He's still a half hour from FSU. If you're going to get a guy, that's the one. It's not like he's going to have a hard time getting to campus. He's got people that are at that school that are big Florida State fans. I know one of them there. That's an important get. He's going to be coming to campus, I'm sure, multiple times this spring. Let's see what Cam Brooks does in terms of official visits. Which ones he sets up, 1st, 2nd, 3rd. That's usually an indicator. I haven't heard anything here recently, but I'm guessing, and it's a strong guess, that Florida State will be his 1st or at least 2nd visit that he sets up. And that, you can say whatever you want. Oh, I don't have a leader. You can kind of follow those things for a timeline on which schools are doing the best. Again, though, like Georgia, Auburn, I'm sure Florida, Miami, all the schools down south that you're used to, Bama, Tennessee, they're all going to try to get this young man on campus. But I have him circled number 1 as far as a lineman in the South Georgia Panhandle region as a player Florida State has to sign. On the other side of the ball, but sticking with linemen, this is a guy that I've talked about multiple times, Mr. Wise at Pace High School just outside Pensacola. He's another kid that I think Florida State can't miss. Just going to Battle Miami, being at a couple of different 5-on-5 events, and just talking to scouts everywhere. His name came up at a 7-on-7 event, and he's an interior offensive lineman. That is a really rare thing. Now, I was talking to a bunch of different scouts about different players, but he was one of less than 5 offensive linemen that came up over a 2-day period at Battle Miami. Wise is really good. He has ties to the University of Miami, but he's been to Florida State before. He's from the greater Pensacola area, and this is a kid that's supposed to come to campus. I would be shocked if Florida State did not prioritize him 100%. Elite talent at center and or guard is always coveted in college football. Look at what Ohio State did to Notre Dame in the national title game. Their offensive line was healthier than Notre Dame's, which is kind of crazy because they had a couple guys banged up, but they did a better job up front than Notre Dame at running the ball, and they won the game. If you can run the football, you can beat teams no matter what because you dictate the pace. Ohio State did that. They averaged just over 5 yards a clip, and it was the difference in the football game because they could throw play action whenever they wanted. Wise probably going to play center. He's 6'3", 280, 290, something like that as a junior. I've heard he's up over 300 pounds. I don't know if he wants to play more than one spot, but I would imagine his first stop will be at the center position. When we come back, we're going to go down a whole bunch more names that are going to be visiting Florida State and some thoughts on it. That's next here on Locked On Seminoles. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule for anyone can be a challenge. That's where Talkspace comes into play. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need very easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours, and it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for the most insured members, there's a zero copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. As a white listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month on Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege and enter promo code SPACE80. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege and enter promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show the support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege, promo code SPACE80. Now, Florida State's first big junior day visit weekend was last weekend. Had a lot of different kids. I think of the January 25th one that we're getting ready to kind of break down a little more wholeheartedly. It's a little more specific, and there's a couple of different guys that, depending on what your likes are, what you think Florida State's needs might be, you would trend towards if you could only pick one or two guys. I get it. But for me, the kid that is just entertaining, and I've talked about him several times, that I think that Florida State needs to get is Jarius Rogers. I think he's the guy that from Fleming Island that is really a good player, 3-star by a couple of different places, but he's also a kid that, to be honest with you, I think it's more about potential with him because he's still not physically filled out. So some people are a little concerned that he's not ready for the immediate help to get into big-time college football and be that guy. That's okay. He's 6'5", 195, 200 pounds. He's going to project as a pass rusher, outside linebacker, probably the same position James Williams, who just transferred from Nebraska to Florida State, is going to play. He'll end up playing at 230, 235 at least. He has a very thin frame right now, but he's going to grow into it. Rogers, again, is about 6'5", so he has plenty of room to do that. And he's at Fleming Island High School, just outside of Jacksonville, Florida. So, again, that's the extended Panhandle area, not that far from I-10. Florida State must win more in this area. Florida, Georgia, several other programs have beaten FSU in that area, even Miami. They've come up to the north part of the state. These are some of the battles you got to go against and win. Notre Dame's trying to get him to come up and visit. Again, watch out for them. But again, this is a prospect that Florida State historically has done well with. And if they want to get back to being an elite program, especially one that's going to utilize a big-time defensive opportunity like the one Tony White is presenting, you got to get guys like Jarius Rogers. Linebacker in a similar position, you got to get kids every now and then outside your area just to sprinkle in with the Florida kids, South Georgia kids. Here's a good possibility if his junior day goes well. TJ White, 200 pounds, maybe just a little bit over. He's from Jackson Academy in Jackson, Mississippi. Ole Miss and several other programs are after him. 4-star kid on multiple platforms, but Ole Miss has been attached to him. So can you go out and get him to visit and show him something different? This is always fascinating to me. And Mississippi is probably the most unique state as far as I'm concerned with Florida State recruiting, because they always seem to get like one kid out of that state. And they've had some great ones, Terrell Buckley, et cetera. They've had some really good players come out of Mississippi. Can you get this kid? Probably one of the top 10 players in the state of Mississippi, and probably a kid that can help you right away, at least on special teams and or in your nickel and dime packages. Might even be able to play multiple spots in the different roles that Coach White and his defensive staff come up with, mixing the 4-3 and the 3-4 kind of scheme, or 4-2-5 or 3-3-5, whatever you want to call it. This is how you win football games, is having multiple players that can move around. So when they're on the field, the opposing team doesn't know where they're going to line up. 6'3", 200 pounds. Again, he's still filling out his frame, kind of like Rogers, but that's okay. Florida State's going to have to swing hard and come up with a big hit. Again, Ole Miss is the team to watch. But for whatever reason, the Noles have always done well in the Magnolia State of stealing somebody. Why not him? A kid that is an offensive lineman to kind of watch out for is Bear McWhorter. This is a kid out of Georgia, 4-star kid on Rivals. He's 3-star on some others. Florida State, Auburn, possibilities. Georgia, that state has always got players, especially linemen. I don't know what it is about the Peach State, but they've always had linemen. Can't really go wrong with trying to rebuild your O-line that way. I already talked about Wise, but McWhorter could play guard or center. Look, they need a player at every spot in this class in the O-line. If I had to pick, I would say 501. Why not? Next, I just want to mention, since I mentioned the offensive line, I want to mention the defensive line. He already visited, but this is a question about the defensive fronts that Coach White has as much as it is the player. James Johnson, kid from North Fort Myers, really good program historically. It's where Deion Sanders came from and a whole bunch of other players. Florida, Georgia, Texas, Miami, all kinds of guys are competing with Florida State, 6'2", 260. That's not the traditional size, however, that you think of in a three-man line. Are they going to run more two-gap, more one-gap, or are they just going to be versatile? Whatever we get, we'll adapt to that talent. There's a lot of ways you could answer that or even ask it even more specifically. But if they're taking shorter defensive linemen, Coach White and the rest of those guys up front, Pot Roast and all of them, they're going to have to figure this out. How often are we going to run one gap and two gap? He's a little undersized. He's not going to two gap like a traditional Georgia or Alabama D lineman. That's not realistic. But at the same time, if you're going to mix and match, sometimes you're in a four-man look. Maybe he plays three tech. Maybe he plays one tech in that, but again, it's one gap. So I'm kind of curious about it, and he's just a really good player. James Johnson is one of the better defensive linemen in the state of Florida for the class of 26. Florida State would do very, very well to get him. I think that recruitment will play out very, very long. From Westlake High School in Georgia, that's the same high school as Cam Newton, and Ward only knows how many other players that have come out of Westlake. Deion Thomas, 6'3", 195 pounds. He's a three-star receiver. I know Auburn and several other programs have been involved. That's a program Georgia recruits hard. Juan Gasson just came out of there. It's a kid Florida State recruited hard, the big offensive lineman. That's a kid that I'm interested to see what happens. Auburn's been after him, but Florida State needs some more size at receiver. Maybe this is their boundary receiver in this class. We'll see. Auburn's going after some big guys too. It'll be maybe one of those two schools. Maybe UGA gets involved. Georgia's really hard to pick with wide receivers, but when they zero in on the guys, they're tough to beat for them too. As far as an offensive lineman that is a bit of an unusual fit for what Florida State has done in recent years, but again, new staff. I'm curious if this young man is somebody they will prioritize. DeJuan Davis at a CCC, Clearwater Central Catholic, tradition-rich program just outside Tampa, and he's listed at 380 pounds, 6'6", 6'7". That is a massive young man. Juan Gaston, who I mentioned a few minutes ago, was at the Under Armour game. He was 6'8", 388 out of Westlake. Walking by him, Juan's one of the biggest dudes I've ever met. Davis probably going to have to reshape his body, but the Noles need more power. And Malzahn's discussed it multiple times. We've got to be able to pound it between the tackles to open up the passing game. Just as the kind of guy that kind of fits that. Is he going to be ready to play early? I doubt it. He'd definitely need a redshirt year, I'm sure, to reshape his body. But I think it's interesting that Florida State's going after him. He's coming in for a junior day. Let's see how that one goes. Noah, I'm probably going to mispronounce the name, Lavely. His brother obviously just transferred to Florida State from UNC. He's out of Walton High School just outside of Atlanta. He will also be on campus. If Florida State has a hard offer for him, I wouldn't be shocked if he committed. A couple other guys, and these are also very important. I don't bring up DBs that often here on this show because Florida State recruits it so well. Don't worry about it. But you could make an argument that the most talented player on campus this weekend is Chauncey Chuck Kennan. He's out of Booker High School in Sarasota, national top 100 kid by On3 and several other publications. Really long, 6'2", 175 pounds. I have no idea what's going to happen with him. He's not been to a lot of events, but his ranking is very high, and he just posted yesterday that, hey, I'm going to be at Florida State this weekend. That's one to watch. And finally, another kid out of the greater Fort Myers area, Joel Irvin, another big offensive lineman. Florida State needs him, and I'm happy to talk about those guys. They have got to do better at getting offensive linemen out of the high school ranks. This kid's 6'6", 280. I don't know if it'll end up being guard or tackle. I haven't seen him for a couple of years. I saw him at a camp once, but I think that's a kid to watch. Oh, and one last thing, Jake Cruel, that's a possibility as well. Just kind of keep him in mind. I talked to Jake a couple of weeks ago at a 5-on-5 event. LSU and Penn State are a couple of schools he said he would probably take OBs to. That could have changed in the last 2 weeks, but he was with Florida State coaches here recently. He posted a picture. When we come back, I have 3 questions, and one of them is really just about the competition. And I'm kind of curious what Florida State fans think is going to happen, because Miami, Florida, and Georgia, those 3 schools in particular could be the thorn in the side for Florida State, or will they? That is next on Locked On Seminoles. Attending NFL playoff games is an experience like no other. Energy, excitement, and the connection with the fans around is unmatched. This year, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable moments, and that is why you need to check out the new feature, Game Time Picks. It filters out all the fluff and allows you to get the best deals on the best seats so you can focus on what matters, being there at the game live in action for NFL playoffs. Game Time Picks is something that I've used multiple times when I'm going through and looking at different games, whether it's NBA, NHL, college football, etc. It's just a tab at the top, right on your phone that you click, and you can check out what's going on. Also, with Game Time in general, you can look at your seats right from your phone. Whatever seat you pick on that phone, it'll show you that photograph to the venue, whether it's a stage, pitching mound, the 50-yard line, whatever it is, you can see it right there. And you also have the opportunity for the lowest price guarantee with Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. 3 questions. That's what we're going to finish up on today. And I'm just curious what fans think. Comment below, YouTube, what have you. Just what do you think will be the biggest thorn for Florida State with how things have been changing with NIL and all the different things? Which of these 3 teams is going to be the biggest thorn in Florida State side in recruiting? Is it Georgia, Florida, or Miami? Whatever reason, no specifics, just whichever reason for the 26th class, which one do you think is the biggest thorn for the Florida State Seminoles? Debatable topic. I mean, all 3 of them really get after it in recruiting. All 3 of them have viable NIL, and all 3 of them are tradition-rich programs. Located close to Florida State, they recruit the same kids. I think this question is fascinating because it changes year to year with assistant coaches moving from one school to another. So Miami, Florida, or Georgia, which one do you think it will be? Right now, I don't have a direct answer, and I could see any one of the 3. But after this weekend, I'm hoping to have a little more information based on the intel that comes out of Florida State's visit, because a lot of these kids are still going to be looking at those schools too, and either have or will visit the Dogs, the Canes, or the Gators. So that's something to think about. Position needs is number 2. I've talked about O-line ad nauseum. It's the number 1 need in this class. That doesn't even count. Let's start at number 1. What O-line doesn't even count. After that, what are the 3 spots that you think Florida State needs to hit the most in the 2026 recruiting class? It's debatable. D-line, you could put up there because it's a different system, but they've recruited it pretty well. They got a transfer too that could come in and have an impact. Maybe they end up with a couple of guys that they recruited from the old staff that really fit in. I think they will. Denise White, etc. But if you want to put D-line up there, I would get it. I'd put it probably about number 3. For me, number 1 need outside, again, O-line, I'm not counting, is wide receiver, but with a caveat. They need an elite high school receiver in this class, a guy that can play early. So it's not the group, but rather the individual amongst the group. Now, I'm not saying you can't go out there and get 4 guys and 3 of them were developmental. That's fine. One of the guys that Florida State signs in this recruiting class has to be an elite wide receiver target that is capable of being in the top 5 pretty much by the end of his freshman fall camp. That's a big task. But there are so many good receivers down south that the Noles have a chance to get each year. And you could always get a kid from Dallas or Chicago or something. You never know. They have to get one of those elite receivers. The second spot for me, and again, O-line's not part of this. It's debatable, but I'm going to go with quarterback, and this is why. The quarterback committed from California, I've seen him play, and he's really good, but he doesn't fit Gus's offense, in my opinion. Prove me wrong, but I don't believe he'll end up in Florida State's class. That's just my opinion. I have zero intel on it. It's just fit. I don't see it. Florida State has to get somebody at quarterback that fits Gus's offense better. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. Keyshawn Henderson would be obviously the home run of all home runs. He is as good, if not better, than any player in the country. I'm a huge advocate of everybody recruiting him. Georgia just offered him. LSU's thinking about it. Florida's recruiting him. Florida State, everybody. But if it's not Keyshawn, again, it's about fit. Florida State needs to develop their high school quarterback room. Notice I said high school quarterback room for a reason. It's okay to get a transfer portal guy, and Castellanos will be a great one-year fit. But if they're going to get to where they need long-term, the Noles must recruit the quarterback position well in terms of not only talent, but fit. They got to do that. That's just the way it is. I would go D-line third just because it's such an important position in general with the transfer portal era and everything. There just aren't that many good D linemen in there. You can get a linebacker a lot easier. That would be the other spot I would kind of balance it with. In terms of the other part of this, I mentioned a few minutes ago, like Joe Irvin, 6'6", 280. Another kid was 380 pounds. I'm curious to see what they do with the offensive and defensive lines in terms of just length. Do you think Florida State should go more developmental and take more frames, or more guys that are established, just have shown production in high school? I'm curious what you think. I can go either way with it, but I think that's a fun exercise to talk about. With a three-man line, quite a bit of the time for Florida State's defense, the length and the height and the weight, those are important data points, but you need it at offensive tackle too. 6'5" and up, generically speaking, is the rule. But if somebody's got really long arms, that he's 6'3.5", it is what it is. Georgia's had a couple kids like that in the last 10 years. You need to get the most desired physical traits, but obviously if they're productive in high school, that doesn't hurt either. Tomorrow on Locked On Seminoles, probably have a little more recruiting information. Going to break down some different things that are going on around the country, kind of big box picture. Might even talk a little bit about the national championship race, as you can look at the teams that were in it this year. What did they do to build their rosters? That'll be tomorrow's Locked On Seminoles show, and I hope to see you then. Until then, please hit that like button, that notification bell, and subscribe to this Locked On Seminoles podcast and share it. I'd love to get in front of more Seminoles fans. Everybody have a good one. I will talk to you again on Friday.